So let's talk about everyone's favorite topic. Let's talk about shame. So, what is shame? I really want to kind of unpack this because it's actually quite simple and it's probably going to be the most important thing that we talk about in a lot of ways. Because shame loves to hide. It's kind of very taboo to even point to shame. And there's reasons why that I'll get into. But just kind of even naming shame, talking about it, talking about its purpose, talking about kind of how it manifests, right? I think it's going to be very, very helpful for pretty much anybody who listens to this. I've never really met anybody who doesn't have shame. And some people can really maybe do a lot of self help growth work and can really be convinced that they have no shame at all and can get into all sorts of problematic behaviors because really it's there, right? It's there hiding in wait and it's really influencing us in many ways, ways that we're not even aware of because it's mostly unconscious shame. And it runs very deep. I would say shame is probably one of the deepest emotions that we have, really. And we learn it at such a young age that it feels so familiar and it feels so much like you that that's why it's hard to talk about this and people can get very uncomfortable, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to be turning off this video as soon as they get to this part, but hopefully you're staying tuned and willing to kind of inquire into this and just kind of stay curious about shame because it is very valuable actually to do this work and especially to work with shame, because if you're interested in emotional freedom, right, from basically feeling more at peace and free, then we need to really look at shame because that's really where all the juice is, I would say. That's where all the gold is. So so what is shame? Let's talk about it, right? Shame is really just a sense of deficiency. And deficiency means lack, like as if I'm missing something, right? And this really forms early on in childhood. We're not even aware at the time when it's happening, but it's like we kind of absorb these patterns from those around us, these shame patterns. And what it feels like is it feels kind of like this internalized anger. That's really how shame feels. When we're really young, right? Like I made a video on helplessness. And really, when we're young, we're quite helpless in a lot of ways. And we have anger as a way to kind of do something to kind of help you navigate life and navigate the world. Now, for the vast majority of us, we learn to repress that anger and we have to hide. We have to hide our fears. We have to hide our anger and then also our sadness too. And what ends up happening is that we kind of turn inward. That anger then turns inward. And now you're kind of hating yourself. You're angry at yourself. And it feels very uncomfortable, right? But we get so used to it that we're not even aware that we have shame. But essentially, it's like an anger towards yourself that's trying to resolve a sense of deficiency. It's almost like a hole. It's like you have a hole inside of you, and it's like, I need to figure this out. I need to do something about this hole. I need to fill it somehow. I need to fix it. I need to do something with myself, which always involves effort, right? You have to try harder. You have to be better. Oh, that's how it is, right? It's almost like whipping yourself, beating yourself up. And there's a lot of energy there. People tend to really use that to motivate themselves, right? There's a lot of motivation that happens when you're full of shame. Because really it's anger, right? Anger is energetic. It's motivating. It's stimulating. But then we also try to suppress the shame because you don't want to feel ashamed, right? It's very uncomfortable. And then trying to suppress the shame and push it away somehow. Now there's a struggle within you. And that might lead to a lot of depression, feeling really tired and all sorts of things. But primarily it's like there's a lot of this churning momentum of shame. It's constantly trying to resolve something within you. And then there's another part of you that's then trying to push that away, like, oh, I shouldn't care about that anymore, or like whatever. I'm fine actually. I'm totally fine the way I am, right? You might do a lot of therapy or growth work, and you might use affirmations. You might tell yourself, everything's fine. I'm okay the way I am, right? But really, it's kind of covering over that shame, that very energetic kind of churning momentum that's constantly motivating you to do something. And then you try to suppress that somehow. And that's just, of course, a recipe for disaster, because how do you do that, right? So the way that we really unwind it is to kind of understand shame and just kind of see where it's coming from, because it's actually a very important protector. Really, all of these patterns and emotions that we work with in shadow work are really protectors, really. And shame especially is a protection mechanism. So if we look back at childhood, right? And if we look at what's going on back then that leads to shame. So again, let's say you're kind of feeling helpless and afraid. You're kind of like dependent on your family, right? And you just really just want to be loved and feel safe, right? That's really what all humans want, especially children. Now, what happens when we don't receive unconditional love, right? What happens when instead we get anger, we get judgment, essentially shame, right? We get like, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you do well on this quiz? Why are you acting this way, right? So we get this anger, and that doesn't feel like love, right? It feels like shame. It feels like, oh, there must be something wrong with me because of the way I'm acting. And you can't really be angry. You can't outwardly express anger to your parents usually, right? Because you get in trouble, you get met with even more anger when you do this. So you kind of just internalize that anger towards yourself, and now, oh, it's my fault. I got yelled at and it's my fault, and I need to be better, right? I need to be better. And so basically this is how shame forms, and it's like a deficiency. It's like a sense of, I'm doing something wrong because I am, and it could be, basically the deficiency words are individual to you, right? But often it's like, I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm defective. Failure. Worthless. Unlovable. What else? I mean, those are really the top ones that come up all the time. So and usually the core of it, the deeper you go, it's always like a sense of worthless, unworthy, unlovable. Those are like the deepest kind of shame patterns. But then on top can be the milder ones, like not good enough, failure, defective. So basically the deeper you go, the more negative it gets. And it's almost always a sense of like worthless or unworthy, and I have to do something about it, right? So there's the deficiency, which could be worthless, and that feels like you, like that might really connect and feel like you. But then there's also a very strong resistance that's like, I have to get rid of this. I have to hide this. I have to push this away. Nobody can see this about me, right? Now, if you explore it like this and just kind of see that, okay, there's deficiencies and there's a sense of needing to resolve the deficiency, now you're connecting to shame. And especially if you can sort of see the benefit. What will I get if I'm not worthless? So you kind of take that deficiency and you kind of flip it. So let's say if it's worthless or failure or whatever, okay, what if I'm not worthless? What will I get? And this way you start to see the utility, because it's almost always like, well, then I'll be accepted, I'll be loved, people will like me. That's always the utility of shame. Because when we're kids, right, again, we just want to be accepted and loved. That's all that we want, right? And when we don't feel that way, it's actually kind of unsafe. Like you start to have fear naturally, because if the group doesn't fully accept you, there's a chance that you could be out on your own. So it's really a very normal response to want to be accepted, to want to be liked, to want to fit in. And shame is kind of how we learn to control ourselves. It's almost like, how do I fit into that, whatever that is? Like if it's, say it's like a circle, right? And you're a square. And it's like, how do I make myself a circle? Like, how do I fit through this, whatever that, like whatever the conditions are that you're taught? If you're taught growing up that you have to be really smart to be accepted, because maybe your parents punished you for doing poorly on tests, but they rewarded you for doing well. Well, now you're taught, oh, I have to be smart to be accepted and loved. And there could be a shame, there could be a deficiency pattern of, well, what's the opposite of smart, right? Stupid, maybe failure, dumb, whatever that is. So now you're kind of seeing, okay, this is something that's learned, and it's really trying to serve a purpose, right? It's really trying to serve the purpose of being acceptable, being likable, being lovable even. It's basically like, how do I make myself fit based on what I've been taught I'm supposed to be, right? Like you're supposed to be good enough. You're supposed to be liked. You're supposed to be smart. You're supposed to be nice. Like whatever those words are, right? Whatever those conditions are, well, that's what you have to be according to shame, right? And we don't need to try to change that. We can just kind of see that it's okay, maybe it's trying to give me something, this shame, right? Especially if you're feeling a lot of shame in the moment, you can, first of all, just notice that you don't want to feel ashamed. Feeling ashamed is not a comfortable feeling. It's almost like this anger towards yourself, like hating yourself. Of course, you're not going to want to feel that way, right? So just acknowledging that first is necessary. It's very much necessary to acknowledge first, I really don't want to feel this way, right? I don't want to feel this way. And then you can start to connect with, well, what is shame trying to achieve though, right? Because what if I am good enough? Or what if I am smart enough? Or whatever that is, right? Whatever that deficiency is, not worthless or whatever. What if I'm not a failure? What will I get? And seeing it in this way can really start to dissolve it, but also seeing that we're really taught to be ashamed when we're kids, because if you're punished and you're told to go to your room and come back when you know what you've done, right? Essentially, that's teaching you have to be ashamed just to be accepted. So it's like we don't want to be ashamed, right? Because we want to all be natural. We want to flow through life. We want to be ourselves, and we don't want to feel all this discomfort. So we don't want to feel that shame. But at the same time, we're really conditioned to be ashamed, right? Like we get this all the time, especially as kids, but definitely as adults, because everyone's feeling shame all the time. If you make any mistake at work, you feel this anger from your boss. Oh, shame. Oh, I'm doing something wrong. Oh, now I'm angry at myself and now I'm going to fix it. So it's so reinforced, really, shame. And it really runs the world, really, as a protection mechanism. And it really connects to safety. If you really go inquire into shame and you kind of see like, what is this trying to really achieve? It's almost always a sense of acceptance, but that's what gives us safety. Remember, it's not just acceptance. Right? Humans need acceptance for safety. We're programmed this way. We're wired this way, really. We're not solitary creatures, right? We're social creatures. So we really want to accept this in our bodies that like, oh, maybe I learned that I need to be ashamed to be accepted, right? But I really don't want to be. Maybe like for safety, it feels like I kind of need to be ashamed, but I really don't want to be ashamed. Maybe I even hate shame. So just remember that there's the opposition, right? And there's a need for both sides. There's a need to push away shame, but there's also a need to be ashamed because we're so conditioned that this is what's going to lead to love and acceptance and safety. That if only you meet these conditions, if only you become good enough, if only you become smart enough, or whatever that is, as soon as you resolve that deficiency, right, everything's going to become better. Except it doesn't, because the deficiency is always perpetuating. It's like a merry-go-round, right? It's like it never stops. self reinforces. And the way to kind of get off that ride is, first of all, oh, this is shame, right? Is that what this is? Is that what this feeling is? Is this shame? Like, I almost always feel it in the jaw, but you can kind of see where you feel it. Where do you feel shame? Can you name it? And can you see if there's any other words that connect to the deficiency? Like, what is it about me? Like, I'm not good enough? I'm a failure? What is it about me that feels wrong? And maybe it's just wrong. That's also a deficiency pattern. Could just be like, I'm just wrong. I'm just stupid. Okay, there it is. And I don't want to be, right? I don't want to be that, whatever that is. Wrong, failure. I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be. Yeah, I don't want to be ashamed either, right? I don't want to be. But maybe there's a need, because maybe this is what gives me safety or protection, even though I don't want it. Maybe there's a need for it, and that's why it keeps coming back. Like, why does this keep coming back? Stay open to this, because whatever comes back is actually trying to help you. Otherwise, it wouldn't be coming back. It wouldn't keep perpetuating. So stay curious to shame. Stay curious about what it is, what it's trying to achieve for you, and also the fact that you really don't like it, right? You don't want to be ashamed. It's the last thing you really want to feel, right? And doing emotional work in this way, especially working with shame, you'll start to really feel a lot of release, and you'll actually feel a lot less other emotions that are negative, right? You're going to feel a lot less anger. You're going to feel a lot less sadness. You're going to feel a lot less fear, really, because shame really tends to drive all of those emotions. It's like this blanket that kind of like covers all those emotions and just kind of amplifies everything, but it's also dampening it too, keeping it all stuck together. And the reason why shame is so difficult to work with is because it really serves such an important need when we're children, because remember, when you're feeling helpless and out of control, right, there's not much that you can do about that, right? You can kind of express anger, but what if you can't even do that, right? Because your alternative is that you can kind of be angry and maybe do something about it, or you're just kind of out of control. You're feeling unsafe, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? That's the last thing that we want as human beings. But what if I believe that there's something wrong with me? What if I believe maybe I'm just not enough? Maybe I'm just not good enough, just worthless. It's not a pleasant belief, but notice how it affords you the option to do something. It affords you the ability now to do something about it. Because if you're just helpless and losing control, there's nothing you can do. But if you're ashamed, if you're worthless, now I can try to not be worthless. Now I can try to not be a failure. I can try to be good enough, smart, useful, helpful, not a failure, right? Everything, right? Pretty much everything, all these patterns are trying to give you something to do, right? Because the alternative is that you're kind of helpless and screwed. There's nothing you can do, right? So that's what we all really avoid, is that loss of control. But the truth is that feeling of losing control isn't really that bad. It's really totally fine. You have the capacity to feel that way, and it's okay. But it's just that when we're kids, no one ever teaches us this. No one ever teaches us that, oh, you're feeling helpless, and that's okay, right? It's normal to feel that way. Oh, you're feeling angry. Oh, okay, good. That's okay too. You can express that way, right? You can express fear. You can express anger. Oh, you're sad. Oh, okay. Yeah, you can express that too. No one ever teaches us that, right? Instead, we get met with this shame, this anger, and we kind of just reciprocate, because it's like, oh, I have to do something about this because I'm not getting the love that I need, the support that I need, right? So now I have to do something about this. And it's like creates this false identity, really. It's like a mask. It's like a false identity of like, I'm not enough, and I need to do something about it. But this is just who I am. This explains everything, and I have to do something about it. So that's why taking off that mask is kind of scary, because you're actually facing the unknown. You're facing what that mask has been trying to protect you from, which is the loss of control and unknown, right? But we can just kind of acknowledge that, like, oh, okay, so this is about safety. This is about protection. Okay, okay. You can even thank shame. That could be helpful to kind of, okay, thank you for your protection. Even though I don't want to feel that way, right? I don't want to feel shame. Maybe I even hate shame. But a part of me kind of needs it for safety. Maybe, right? And maybe that's okay. So try to look at it this way and really stay open to the needs. Try to stay open to what is this trying to achieve for me. And again, it's sticky for a reason, right? It's hard to take off the mask for a reason. It's been serving you well for a long time. It's just really itchy and uncomfortable. And a part of you really does want to take it off, right? And you can. It's totally fine to take it off. But you kind of might feel the elements more, right? You might feel the wind more, or the cold. And that's okay. You'll get used to it, really. So you definitely are more vulnerable without the protection, but at the same time, you have the capacity to really handle anything. And it does take some practice and a little bit of faith to kind of start the journey to taking off the masks, being curious about the masks. But it's definitely well worth it. So hopefully this is helpful.